Just back to chili crickets again. Another year. Have we done any better? I don't know. We're still chili crickets, so maybe not. And all that changes the day we decide not to be crickets. And I always extend that to, it's not just about knowing a thing, it's about doing something about it. Doing is the operative point. Everywhere you look, if you're looking close enough, you see it's the deeds, indeed. Whether that be an occupying force or whether that's your opposition to it. It's what you do. And so I stay here repeatedly every week for years, just repeating myself over and over in different ways and trying to get anybody to do anything, again, properly and more properly. And until we start doing that, it won't matter. None of this will matter. The one that has the plan that is doing will win. And before I move on too far, I believe this is BTWRLM 239. For those of you on Pastcast, Prodcast, or Recast. Last week we were touching a little bit of the fallout from the Kennedy assassination things, and a tweet that I put out and said what monstrous truth is hiding in all this. One of the things I had in my mind that I didn't make a list of, is not much to talk, much reason to really talk too much on the Twitter. Some things are interesting to exchange, but it's not a forum to be discussing too much. One of the things that was sitting there, the monstrous truth, was the United States government's abject incompetence. Maybe that's the real monstrous truth sitting in all that. It is what it is. It is what you see. It's as corrupt as it is. It's going to continue until some people step up and start to take it to task. But one of the things that I didn't speak to, and of all the things that could be sitting there, the monstrous truth, we can go down the conspiracy track, was just simply that this thing called the United States, the people that work in it are all just fooling everybody. Everybody's being duped by this whole thing. And I found it interesting that someone comes out within the weekend and literally hits that nail right on the head. What the Kennedy assassination records reveal: uncontrollable incompetence. This is written by Charles U. Smith, and again, you can refer to it in the Blogcaster links if you can find it by typing it in while you're listening. He goes through and explains that this whole thing that you're watching is just showing you, point after point, how the government just is I'll read. I think the agencies fear something larger: exposure of their gross incompetence, their cowboy recklessness, and their disavowal of elected civilian control. Pretty strong statement, but if it's a disavowal of civilian control, he's already in the context of military control, isn't he? And he concedes that. And this is proper, I think. But he concedes that too. I'm not the only one that sees this deed. And remember, the Lieber Code, without getting into it, it states that you know them by their deeds. It says it right up front. It's one of the first things you read. You don't have to be told what you're under when you can see it. Your words mean nothing. It's what you do. So we can wax eloquent about all we know. I'm telling you, it means nothing. It means nothing. And until we get that really firmly in our mind, we're going to go nowhere. In the best case, we're going nowhere. That's the best case. But I don't see it happening in the best case. I see continuously that we are so behind the game. This game, if they want to call us in, they put us in this experiment, and the experiment is coming to fruition, and they got the outcome that they had planned the experiment to turn out to be. Anyway, I won't read more. Again, I go through these tabs really not for me to read to you. They're to show you that there's conceptualizations outwardly that are there, that people sense what's going on. There are people that can write about it. I'm saying there's no excuse for us to consider anything else than this is really the truth, and stop making excuses for not working against it. The worst truth on this whole thing is the United States is it's just buffoon as an entity. That's the worst case on its duping us. The worst case, on the other hand, is it is a military force, and I think that's another thing to be reckoned with. Or the worst case, I guess, is that it's a buffoon with military power that goes and reckons with the world as a bully. Now that's probably more the case. It's those bullies, the types that you met in high school, and you notice that the world is reducing down to this, the interactions are as if we're in a schoolyard and the bullies are yelling at each other, in particular Trump with Kim Jong-un, just like schoolyard bullies each other. One's beaten, one's not going to take it, and one's going to try and see how big and bad he is. It's just nonsense. And that's just where we are at this point. And I don't understand why there's not more of a hue and cry against it, except that you're all touched. You're all touched, and not in a judgment. This is all us. This is what we're they're playing it out before you. The witness of the truth is explaining your failures in you. And I think I've been trying to tell you that. If I haven't said it, I'll say it one more time. It's you. They're playing off of your weakness. You're playing off of you. They know you're just going to sit there and make every excuse not to get involved. And I say just get involved wherever you think you can make a change. And typically that's going to be right around where you live. We do it locally. It's no different as it crosses my mind to say William Roberts was telling you the same thing. There's no difference in an answer. You'll see now lots of hosts talking about it. These things are just self-evident, and that they aren't is the problem. That people don't see this as a self-evident truth. They want to start talking about the inanities of things. Shows you that we're in some real trouble. I'm also encouraged. It's only going to take the remnant, we're told. And it only does when you look in history to make that change. But a lot of people say, okay, then let them do that. Well, it's going to take someone to make that decision to step up. Don't be chili crickets. Don't be soggy cricket. Don't be any cricket. Step up. Do something. Don't let this thing go away without asserting yourself. So another thing that came on the boards, so this monstrous truth might be the United States is just this big bluster, buffoonery. It doesn't mean that the people in the country can't actually put it into order. I believe, from my perspective, that we can do that literally through the land and the laws we understand now. Once the veil of monarchy was taken off the land itself, I think that gave us the awareness of how this thing gets done, and so we all can live that so-called sovereignty we talk amongst each other. Apparently, I can see apparently, but to the limit of someone else's rights, and that not being frivolous either. See, what you're seeing is an expansion of what so-called rights are, the inanities and the stupidities that come out of so-called gender identity. And I tell you, when you go into legal, there is no gender. So what are they talking about? These rights only come out of legal. So what are they even talking about? This is how dumb this whole thing is. But another thing that comes through for those of us that may have wondered, and we heard about it or didn't or whatever, and had a question, I wanted to point out something else, another fallout about this, and we'll see this, as I told you last week, it's an extension. We see the same story told over and over, the same methodologies worked over and over. Why? Because they work against you. That we find out, at least if we can take any of this information as valid, and I have to give some validity to it. I went over at CLG News, or LegitGov, Twitter, and on there they have a picture of the memorandum. And the comment is, Oswald was a CIA asset and trained by Office of Naval Intelligence. Now, I've heard about that, and that's been a possibility sitting out there. Well, now I see a document. For those of you that want to get the link or go seek it out, it's there. You can read it for yourself, and it's highlighted. And it's a discussion about Oswald. It's pretty interesting what they used him for. So he was a part of it. Whether or not he became the story, that he was supposed to not be part of the story, or didn't know that he was going to become part of the story, is really irrelevant to the point that that's how it goes down. And if you look at just about everything that's been going on, especially since 9/11, just nonsense coming out, using the war on terror as the war of terror against us. These are players on the inside doing this, whether they get set up by their own, or whether they're part of that plan, or whether they are part of the plan. We think they're dead, and then we can't, and they move off onto the greener pastures, and they're done and they're used, but they're set up. I don't know, and I don't really care to know. We have evidence that he was a CIA asset. When you find out where he went, he was doing quite a bit of intelligence work throughout the world, and in Russia, apparently. Does it answer what he did or what happened? No, it doesn't say any of that, but we now know this was, all the insiders were in on this Kennedy thing. If we had a question before, this document on that point settles that matter. And so what falls out from these things are the collateral issues. And I suggested last week we'll probably never, ever know. And we weren't, and again, we're so poor at witnessing. We wouldn't even really know if we were standing there, I suspect. And neither here nor there. Our lives are being changed as we go. The deviance is being normalized, and it moves into the next thing, and we can find all those people that know about this and actually use this as repeated tools. And I'm here just to point it out one more time. Okay, here it is. Now what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? The only thing I can find in definition in the dictionaries is for terrorism is that governments commit it or prosecute terrorism by fear, intimidation, and dread. And in my mind, it immediately said at the time when I saw that, I said, well, that makes the IRS a terrorist organization. And then the terrorist now conforms the definitions and redefines itself outside of its own, accepts itself from the terrorism, and you all think that it can't be a terrorist. In fact, it's the prime terrorist. It's such a terrorist, it was able to control the terms. Let me quickly remind you about Title 50 in the United States Code. The exceptions to all the government's ability to literally harm you and legalize torture, harm, all this stuff. As I explained a long time ago to Clint Richardson, I said, you're on the track. You just need to know it's in the code. Here, go read here. So it's just there, folks. It's black and white. You're just going to read it for yourself. But I've also told you that this so-called reality they keep telling us, and I'm not here to tell you I know reality. I assume the stuff the table I'm touching right now, the keyboard, the things I'm talking to you, I believe that's reality sufficient enough. That big ball in the sky is the sun. I believe all that's reality enough. But what this reality is, I don't know. Ultimately, how we explain what it is, I don't know. We have a language that, had I known earlier, was really neat in trying to define the reality, called math. I would have probably taken a much greater interest and been less confused by it. I found this all out after school. For as much as I could do chemistry, understand pretty complex chemistry at the time, beyond, it was literally at the college graduate level. And we know that because I took tests on that just as a contest. That's what they used to do. They used to test you, and if you're in those ranks, you got to go do tests. See how good you were. How much did you know relative to what we thought we knew? Well, it was really science-based. It was more on facts and things. And so we tested pretty high, things that we were all kind of gifted in, we tested pretty high even without the math, without the reality. We just had, there's an intuitive sense. And part of that is what you use when I say look through the transparent to see what the harm is. There's an intuitive sense that can be kicked in, and does kick in. Yeah, the words will give you a lot of the clues, but then you'll start seeing bigger insights that come as flashes of thought, at least the way it works for me. And so I've told you, whenever you have, we've been watching the so-called science coming through. It's really now anymore, these are political lobbyists in the costume of scientists. And remember, science is only the questioning, trying to find the answers to questions of your reality and trying to make sense of it. Never really comes to an answer. We just get our best good guess after it, which can be changed with the next new knowledge. Because insights that are agreed to by people may not be actually complete. They may not actually fulfill what reality is showing us, because our observation of it, our sensors are too limited. We only have our 5 senses of physicality, and then I suppose those of you that would agree, we can go to the 6th sense, that so-called intuitive sense, the inspirational sense. That may be a seventh. I don't know. It depends on how you want to frame your constraint. But it comes out in the I guess it's how you put it together. This week it all comes together. I've been telling you this so-called science we hear is really it's just, well, the things that we tend to deal with anymore is really political lobbying. It's not science. And then the science underneath it is really just a bunch of political lobbying for fun. So it's all about the buck. The buck, not money, but the buck, the note, the debt. And we get into debt because we keep asking for it, and we're under a servitude to get more of it. It's really a pathetic life we've set up and allowed for ourselves, but it comes out, folks. If you listen, wait long enough, the honesty and the truth comes out. They make so many things up, they fabricate so many ideas that all of a sudden the house of cards starts crashing down. Oh, like another house of cards in the entertainment field, I understand. I don't even know nothing about it. I just saw it come through some program called the House of Cards has now collapsed, just like the House of Cards it is. Interesting to me that way. But here it is, folks. New study has scientists questioning everything they thought they knew about the universe. And do I need to read more, really? I mean, folks, I'm really down to I've been telling you this, just read the headlines. The headlines will give you enough that you need to know if you have the eyes to see, to keep moving on, and then I say you get to the point where now you have to do something. If the scientists don't have a clue of the basics of this whole setup, why are we listening to them anymore? What happened to the wonder of the investigation? Based on sound things, not based on your desire to fill some political agenda to gain the money that the politicians are funding. Not based on some intuitive sense that you have to inquiry that you can develop on a private. No, you get the whole public to pay for your fraud. And they've learned how to do that. This is what I call the black hole funding, leverage funding. They come after the people. The parasite called government feeds off the people that have to go make this money. It's not money, it's this currency printed fiat, and you have to go make it. When you do that, then they get to take their part because you're using that system. We're so unintelligent as to maintain this. It's not like I'm above it. I've got to use it too because everyone else is there. It's kind of like a catch-22 in a way, but we don't make the solid grounds to go commodity for commodity, if you will, specie, which gets us into the silver and gold asset side, which they can't really tax you on. They'll try to convert what you did to commerce, but if you've been listening to me, you put it in production. Now that's a chasm they weren't supposed to breach. That's a pirate ship trying to build a gangplank across your boat. They can't do that. Now they can because they're going to have a lot of power, but once everyone starts seeing that, the way I'm seeing this, you'll realize there's no excuse. New study has scientists questioning everything. I want you to remember that. They question now everything, and why wouldn't they? How are we so arrogant to know we believe how things are done and created? And then the same week, it comes out, we have this guy in the Vatican. Just find interest in the integrated message that pops out periodically, and by the week, because that's I come here once a week. Pope Francis, there is no heaven or hell. See, there's no scientists or just these other types of religiosities that they're telling you their religion's no good. They don't have a clue. And Pope Francis comes out and says there is no heaven or hell. It's right after he said that Jesus was the devil by taking on the burdens. He goes on to say a whole lot more. I won't even read all this. He goes, there is no heaven or purgatory or hell. I want you to remember, this is right at the time. This is right before the big celebration with the Protestants and the Lutherans and the treaty that you never haven't heard anything about. I'm astonished at the silence here, actually. I thought they were going to make a bigger issue, but as you think about it and think about it longer, you start thinking, well, maybe not. Maybe they don't want to call your attention to these fractures. It was an internal struggle that they've now conquered. Those that have been planning this the whole time have conquered. The guy that's in the seat, the Jesuit in the seat, comes and tells you what you've been thinking, and this is the people in the Catholic faith. What you thought isn't the way it is. Why? Because they never really understood it. They were making it up the whole time. But he comes right out to tell you about this. You can listen to it at all. You can tell this is a message they're giving to everybody. I told you a long time ago there's going to be some pretty astonishing things being done, and the new deviant normalization is going to be being made upon us. It has been this whole time. Watch this. This is actually a pretty interesting fascination to watch this come about. Not knowing how it would happen. How do you possibly do this? And then to watch them pull this off. I'm telling you to watch how they pull this off, if nothing else. This really has to be pretty cool. It is to me. Not that I like it, but at some point you just have to sit back and marvel at the gullibility and dupability of people. I'm not a part of that, but I see this part. I don't know where I'm being duped, but I see this part. We were told this whole thing was going to flip over on its head. We thought we were going up right side up. We're actually sliding into the stinking abyss. No, that's stinking with the double E's. Stinking. We're going into the stinking abyss on our head. We just can't figure that out. We think we can stand up and make this thing right. Anyway, so right before that, there's a report. Right before the 31st, right before the big day of the celebration of the joining of the Protestants and the Lutherans and all that faction that broke away, they come up with these stories. Pope Francis has abolished hell, purgatory, heaven, and by a papal confidence. So there's another method right there in the title. He's not saying it himself necessarily outright, but they'll get the report from a papal confidant. So he has a little bit of measure of plausible deniability, although he doesn't because he's on tape. My point is they report it like it's a plausible deniability. And you're going, what? How can that be right? You always got a question of doubt in your mind when you read that. Kind of a marvel at how they're pulling this off. He's flipping the whole narrative on its head. He has everything you thought you believed in upside down and inside out, exactly the way they wanted, and they're doing it through the communications of the master they're pulling this all through the master of communications, which is ruling this whole world, if you will. You're watching right before your eyes the destruction of people of faith because they have to create a unity of another. And they have the plausible reasons why, but I told you listen very carefully to these subtleties. So what happens on the 31st when this big treaty is supposed to come in together? Really nothing, but they come up with this little ditty. Vatican Lutheran Federation announced study on church Eucharist ministry. The official Catholic Lutheran dialogue, remember, dialogue to consensus. This is the whole method over and over. Globalization, consensus-based subversion, felony against you. This is it right here. Talk to you in the word dialogue. The official Catholic Lutheran dialogue will begin a deeper exploration of common beliefs and differences on the Church, Eucharist, the ministry, the Vatican, and Lutheran World Federation announced. And this is on Halloween Day of the 31st here, October. Don't even want to read more. It makes me sick just to read how they tell you, how they dupe y'all. I was going to read. I want to read, but I don't want to read. I don't want to read for you. I want you to tell you that this is all connected. These are all the dots that are connected to show you that there's a thing afoot that maybe you better start to discuss. If you're not into the Bible, as I see, so I think Joe up there in UCY with the Bible, B-U-L-L, PSYOP 0.0. Yeah, well, you can just call it a name, or you can decide to call it out as well and do something. And if you're not into that part, you go find where they are using these same methods and you interfere with that, because that's the ripple effect backwards. Just like as we did in 2013. We laid the foundation which destroys this so-called dialogue to consensus that they pull off everywhere. Now we did it particular to the United States of America, in particular to land law and producer and grants. So some of you will have to kind of work out how you're going to get outside of that parameter. I'm not talking in there. I still see the methods, but I'm not focused on that. We have some foundational law here that everyone seems to poo-poo what's law, but it's an objective basis in the minimum, and these guys can't defeat it. And what I'm talking about, grants, even defeats the historic analysis of the black and white we read that says they purportedly own the whole world. Because when they grant it away and they grant it to you, they can't grant it to someone that can't receive it. And they extinguish every right they had in it. And when you understand these basic things, you'll understand why I've been talking the way I have been. We have a way, at least in the physical, to defeat this thing, show the example of its defeat. If I can say it better that way, I think is better to tell you. We show the example of its defeat to real authority. So what happened on the 31st? Halloween? For the Vatican? Oh, they're just going to get into a continuing dialogue, despite the fact they're supposedly signed a treaty to heal heal the schism created by Martin Luther. I talked to you before about that. What is also about this time? What's happening, today? November the 5th? Do I have this correct or not? I don't remember. Sounds like it. Guy Fawkes. The mask. I talked about this already. I've done already a broadcast about this, maybe a couple of them, talking about you all been duped into that. You bought all the masks. Those that you did. You got into the Guy Fawkes. Yeah, really great sentiments, folks, but he was a Jesuit. He was going to destroy the parliament. You got all the romantic movie that came out about it. Lots of good principle in that, but they're not using it the way they're telling you. It all happens at the same time with the Halloween, at this big schism time. See, it's all part of that process. You may not believe it, but they do. And they're winning with this stuff. They got you all to put a mask on. They got to spend a lot of money to get those masks on top of that. They got you to feed into the entertainment system. They got you to feed into the movies. They got the whole thing going. And now I understand they're celebrating. In fact, I think it was in the chat. They're celebrating this stuff. The Jesuit celebration. Read about Guy Fawkes. What happens the day before to kind of, and not spin off of this, but kind of interfere with it. But we hear supposedly, and it was promoted so, Antifa civil war on November 4th was really just a few protests against Trump when it came down, but it was developed and promoted, and I think they're actually going to point out here, this is a Newsweek article, I think they point out that Alex Jones was the big promoter of the Antifa civil war. And it happens on the 4th. The same time, they're also promoting an EMP drill. And if you're listening to me, I suppose that nothing went on there. But see, this is all the big hoopla, but it all comes around these same times. As if they're pulling a little bit of energy from this Guy Fawkes thing, or try to drown it out a bit. Remember, the Balfour Declaration happened. I was talking about it last week. This is a crime against humanity. This was just a declaration by a Secretary of State, if I understand this right, that turns into be the prison, the Palestine prison, open-air prison. What morals people can do this to other people? I don't know. I guess I say that as a question. markonthebeast@yahoo.com if you got a good answer for that. What moral people do this? On a letter. And we heard last week that May is proud of this nonsense. It's just crimes. Crimes against people. So Alex Jones has, I guess, pumped up this Antifa civil war. I don't know. I don't discount any of this stuff. These people are dangerous. All these people that buy into it, if you're going to wear a black mask, a black bandana around your face, or you're going to buy a Guy Fawkes mask, you're the same problem to me. I actually kind of got interested in the well, I don't even know what side they were, the Trump supporting side, the so-called supremacists. They all donned armor. I just had to laugh about that. Welcome to the current Middle Ages, folks. It's all over you. The 1500s are here. Are we going to have that renaissance, though? Particularly to me, I've told you, I used to make armor. I mean, medieval armor, real suits of armor. So it's kind of a big joke to me in some regard. Watching this stuff play out. I've anticipated all of this. I've made writings back in the 2000s before I even really knew about the internet that are all here, folks. It's all been in the writings before us. I see everyone talking about it now. It's kind of neat to hear it. They hear it from different sources, but the point is that it's now being talked about. But it's just being talked about. No one knows really what to do about it. And I'm sitting in a pinnacle point to see, a pinnacle point, because I apparently have kind of blazed my own trail to a mountain to be able to see down into the valley. And no one understands that it's there to go do. You got to blaze that trail. And I don't know how much higher a mountain I'm climbing, but where I'm at, there's not many, if anybody, around to work with, or most everybody needs massive amounts of help just to get their mind wrapped around how to actually approach the system that's been put up around you, your own open-air prison. So we got big promotion, I guess, from Alex. This Newsweek is blaming Alex Jones. I don't listen to Alex Jones, so I don't know if he was or not. I'm just saying there's a lot of division. Even if he did, see, he's sowing division. If he didn't, then they're sowing division on the external side of what represents itself as more mainstream news, trying to attack. See, it's all about keeping you off balance and attacking. Attack. It's attacking you by you attacking others. And we've got to kind of back off. So Guy Fawkes presenting the Jesuit. Now 500 years later, sometime after Guy Fawkes, or the 500-year schism, then Guy Fawkes pops up. Then now in our time, we have this Pope coming out now, destroying, vilifying Jesus, and then saying that there's no hell or purgatory. None of that. All the doctrines, as a kid, I remember hearing about as being people talking about. Now apparently this guy can just destroy the whole thing. Well, that must mean that he's just a man. He's just making stuff up, and we can continue to follow that. And there is a real deep insight that needs to be looked at. There's something that you have to look for the omissions, and you have to look for the concurrences, and then you run across something like the Sinai Bible, which doesn't even match up to anything. Not well. 14. Let's put it this way: over 14,000 inconsistencies between what's considered to be the oldest available Bible, which Britain also has in their museum. Why Britain again? So where are you going to settle down and start to think about that? You just give up? See, that's what they want you to do too. They don't want you to find the truth of the matter. They want you to understand that there's a deviation in the normal, and the deviance is what they want you to accept. This is why I've been trying to tell you, you really have to look through what the game is that they're playing on you. It is psychological warfare. To me, in this particle, this thing, if it's true that Alex Jones has escalated this Antifa get together as almost like an Occupy into a civil war, you really have to look at that guy. And I don't mean for very long. I mean to dismiss him. He or anybody like him is causing problems. You're wasting your time, essentially. And if you're not listening behind the woodshed, taking the principles you hear and then moving them on your own, you're actually wasting your time as well. To touch base with this is great if you're moving forward. If you're not, you're just wasting everybody's time and your life. To do nothing brings this on you, which is our problem here today. So in the face of, remember the Pope was also the globalist that he is, trying to unify the world underneath these behavioral controls called this now unknown existence that he can fabricate. Just like the scientists in the same week find out they don't know about this whole stuff. Everyone's been making it up. It is what it is, but everyone's making up how to describe it. And who's going to control that part of it? Remember, part of that control is that you, part of the creation, is the problem to the creation. It's actually the problem to their fabricated world. And this thing comes underneath a term called climate change. And in the same week, it's very interesting, the dichotomy, destruction, the division in the government, which apparently has no remedy. I see a remedy, but apparently there is nobody can do a thing about this. I see easy answers to all this. Trump administration federal report confirms climate change is human-induced. Now you know that Trump was against the Paris Treaty, the Paris Accord. He was against, he was calling out the EPA, all this stuff, okay? So we have all of that, and then the agencies. He says Trump administration comes out, not Trump, but all those agencies that I told you we've been fighting against because they're putting on they've got the method internal to the system to destroy what we know as America. And the one thing I can see that did make us unique and way better, the thing that did oust the king, the queen, whoever you want to, the monarch, however name you want to put on it, who ends up being this singular force, even administration. The laws of the land of the United States are able to answer to all this nonsense. The agencies come out, 13 of them, the same ones we've been fighting, and who, by extension of our lawsuit, through the EPA no less, because of their grant stream funding for such things as climate change, all in our lawsuit at the injunction, done by the method of consensus, dialoguing here and dialoguing there, dialoguing you into the stinking abyss. These same 13 agencies are part of the National Climate Assessment that they have to write every year. Reveal, and this revealing is nonsense. I mean, this is not a reveal at all. But they says that reveals the global warming is caused by human activity. A direct contradiction to U.S. President Donald Trump's consistent rejection of existing climate science. Now, you've got I'm on the record over and over about this. This is not science. These are political lobbyists in the costumes of science. I want to know when these people are going to be put in jail for fraud. That's what I want to know. These agencies that came out to do this, who use the same lame excuses for to support this are committing, they're committing fraud. But see, when in our lawsuit, if you understand what happened, and I've told you here and there about this, we sued the Bar Association, which is the underpinnings of this legal system, which drives this whole thing, which will make the final decision for your life about this. They did not come to answer when we sued them, and they agreed to committing treason with these things. So it's not just fraud what these people do. This is a treason. This is a destruction of your nation. This is the intentional destruction of the laws that you would rely upon, which make you the most unique people because of your land law and its ability to keep the whole world away from what you possess. Now that has to reflect from someone having the capacity, which means that you yourself have that same capacity. Your body has that same capacity. And if you look very, 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 very carefully, you'll see that there is this recognition of this so-called sovereignty in you, in your land, in all this stuff. The government can only actually address things that are coming into, if you will, the common, the public arena. Things outside of you that you do into that space. Things that you do that it has cognizance of. And we make one of the comments to this in a word, in a term actually, is commerce. And I say you look in the laws of the land and it's against versus, not against, but versus. It's a chasm between them. Is production. And there's not supposed to be any kind of commingling. In fact, there's court cases on when there's a bright line about when that transfer happens. And I'm asking you all to learn enough to figure that part out. But so the 13 agencies come out and now support human activity. Well, these agencies consider you to be an animal. I don't know how many years I've been telling you all about this. Go read the statute codes, the United States codes. They're all there to read. In fact, when they talk about man, he's a pest to a pest that they use, that they monitor to do things, which is under pest control. If you don't get this, you read very carefully, you'll see all this stuff. I've talked about this years and decades ago. It brought into the broadcast from there. Like I said, I've written about a lot of this stuff way back right before 2000. So Trump says this stuff is nonsense, but the agencies, the bureaucracy that's destroying your lives, says, oh no, this is real. And I'm telling you it's a treason what they're doing. It's fraud that these people pretend to be scientists, and they come right out and they tell you, oh no, this is not a political answer, this is science. And it's not, because their status is as a political lobbyist. Their own paperwork, I've read it behind Woodshed, their own paperwork, the origin since 1985 of this whole thing and their statuses admit them all to be political lobbyists. They're not scientists. And if they were scientists, they admit they don't know. They're just taking the best guess that we can reproduce. It doesn't mean it's the truth. And this is all done now. You have to understand how this thing works. These agencies come out, despite another story that pops out all at the same time, to give us we can see the dynamic. The UN admits that the Paris climate deal was a fraud. Well, no, it is a fraud. The thing I find interesting about this little report is how they kind of messed up a little bit. They called it global hot air. Remember I was talking about the Parliament in UK? If they wanted to stop global warming, they'd just shut everybody up in the Parliament in UK talking about it. We'd shut down global warming, human-caused. Well, they start out their story, global hot air. Here's a United Nations climate report that environmentalists probably don't want anyone to read. It says that even if every country abides by the grand promises they must have made last year in Paris to reduce greenhouse gases, the planet would still be doomed. This isn't even new news. I've reported about that part going on. You can't undo that. You can't do this. You can't put enough money into it. And probably partly because it's a big lie anyway. How do you stop something that has no basis? As I put it on Twitter. And what the problem with this story is, this author states, but it turns out. He goes into dialogues with you about how all this is not right and how it's making a basic discussion about it, and then he talking about how they've set it up so it looks like something, and then he uses this little phrase, but it turns out. And I had to respond. Oh, this whole thing reduced down to that little turn right there. But it turns out. See, the phrase "but it turns out" agrees with the climate change principle. Right? You bought into it already. They got you to buy into that much to even consider it and talk about it. Is my problem with most of all this discussion. As I responded in Twitter, but it turns out is a quote, doesn't turns out. It's been an identifiable fraud from the beginning. And then I posed the question. Now, just think about how this works, folks. These people think you are the problem to this global climate. And they have every answer for you that how they've decided you're gonna have to fix it. Because you are just, your existence is the cause. And my response to that is then, besides, with this, but it turns out to be no good, and the imposition of these sorts of do-gooders, how are you ever doing nearly enough as they impose upon you that you're not doing enough? How are you ever doing nearly enough versus someone suffering from Munchausen syndrome? MarkOnTheBeast.yahoo.com. If you got an answer to that one, I want to know. How are you ever going to do enough when you're dealing with someone who's suffering from a Munchausen syndrome? Remember, that's the one that cares for you so much that they hurt you in order to go care for you, to make the claim that they're caring for you. And oh, look what you're suffering that needs to be dealt with. These are a bunch of insane people. And we keep allowing them to set this stuff up and take us down. And the Pope's right on in on. He's a guy now. He's now destroying the entire doctrines of a Catholic religion. At the same time, the scientists are looking around with their finger in their nose, wondering, well, how does this thing work out? What is this all about? And you tell me, folks, when the scientists are now looking at the entirety of how this thing works, how in the heck do they have the authority to talk about climate change? And remember, it's just a statistical relationship on an unproven hypothesis as well. These people aren't scientists. They're political lobbyists. And you have to call them out for what they are when you meet them. I told you, what if best science is a fraud? Then they have you by the throat. In this case, I'm trying to show you as well, this is a mental illness. Oh, you're not doing nearly enough. We can do more. See, the article buys into the fact that anything could be done. And then says, but it turns out. Well, no, it doesn't turn out. It's always been the fraud. It doesn't turn out to anything. It's been a fraud. The people that are doing it are snake oil salesmen, if I give them that much credit. Trying to earn a living. No, these people are committing treason. These people are committing fraud. These people are insane, and we give it air. I've given it air. I've given more hot air now to that. Maybe I should have just shut up. I'd have solved global warming all by myself. But the point is, as long as most of all y'all continue to actually agree with this and don't step out to say, wait a minute, this is nonsense, we got to shut this down now, then it's going to continue and things aren't going to get any better. In fact, they're getting a whole lot worse. And I always find the integration between what we call secular society or religious societies, and I always find that there's this interesting connection despite everybody says there's a separation. And then, and I'm always remember how I think. I have categories and possibilities. I've read a lot of international documents that give me possibility, probability categories for international connections. And I'm gonna one of the lines is that the Vatican still makes a claim over lots of things, like the whole world. And if you haven't found that document, you haven't been researching enough. And I have to apologize. At the time, when I'm looking for where America went, I didn't realize I was going to have to collect a whole lot of evidence as I was going to prove what I'd found wasn't what we were told. And that's one of the studies. I didn't have documents. I didn't collect documents in order to be able to prove it today. And to tell you the truth, life happened. I wouldn't have had them actually in my possession at this time anyway. But I always find the intersections of so-called secular society, political society, and religion when very, very prominent. It's kind of negated, and everyone wants to say that there's supposed to be a separation between church and state. In one possibility, probability category, there is no difference that we hear today. At the same time, all at the same time, citing the Bible, the EPA just blew up its science advisory boards. So Trump in the administration of what's going on, he's trying to drive a wedge between the commingling of interests. At the same time, the agencies are showing that they're not going to agree with any of that. It should give you notice that we've got a problem, a big one. And it is showing in the dysfunction of the government of the United States at this point. And I'm not talking about the swamp that Trump was already into before he even got elected. All the people that got thrown in around him were all setups as well. And I don't know how much a part he's been playing about that. He may have had his own thoughts. He may have been really different and distinct, but I don't know. And now he was shown the Zapruder film and said that could have been you. I don't know, folks. There's been a big change in where he was going, but he still pulls these little things off to show that there's a problem. Well, they say that the EPA just they're citing the Bible. Well, it's usually all done out of turn anyway. I'm not pointing out on that. What I'm saying is that there's an interrelation. But you got almost looking like two factions of a religiosity fighting for control of the government. And in this case, I'm wondering what side do you have to choose on here, right? I mean, you're going to have to choose something. They're going to take it in one direction. I think I'd rather go in the direction that's going to say, no, we want to see some lack of commingling in this consensus process. We don't want our science people in on the decision making. We want the decision makers to take the science as it's independently or not, well, it'd be independent because they're getting paid for it, independently being done in a neutral capacity. But see, we understand that the science is not in a neutral capacity. And so the Trump administration, the execution of what's going on, is attempting to separate the problem in the EPA, which is what we sued in 2013. So I can tell you this is a legitimate problem, but I can tell you that what goes on here is not good enough because they continue the advisory council capacity, which is another problem. And out from the geneticist that I happen to follow on Twitter, again, that was I don't know why I'm following her. I can't select anybody, actually. Those of you on Twitter, you wonder why I don't follow too many people, because they won't let me follow. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do anything. And so I just have the 34 that I have, and one of the ones that showed up was a geneticist that she commented about this whole thing, and her comment was, so industry, which makes products the EPA regulates, no conflict of interest, but researchers that gets EPA grants is a conflict of interest, right? Not too happy about that, and she's sensitive to this science thing because she's a scientist, right? And so this is a big deal for the scientist. You don't got money, you don't live. You can't go do what you can do. You're not going to sit in your hovel with a candle burning and study alchemy. You're just not going to do it. Not anymore. This is partly the other part of the system that's been developed up so that they won't. That's not going to be possible either. But my response to all that was, because they were continued to refer to advisory councils, and I've told you about these advisory councils, there's a law about them, they were notorious for being interfered with. And I'm not taking sides one way or the other. I'm saying they are a neutral tool for anyone to take control inside the system, that a law, Federal Advisory Council Act, or Advisory Committee Act, had to be made to try and make some order with this. You're actually supposed to be a chartered entity when you do this. You're inside the agency when you're advisory council. You have to keep track of this. And so her looking at this a little bit indignantly, taking the fact that EPA regulates the products and there's no conflict of interest, but that EPA grants money that there would be a conflict of interest, I don't think that she quite gets the point. And she's kind of conflicted to be looking at it anyway. But my response to that was, there is law regulating advisory councils, but doesn't get rid of the problem. See, the law regulating advisory councils is the problem. It's still this consensus-based nonsense where the advisory council giving information is that stakeholder, partner, cooperating agency, cooperator, team player that is subject to the determination of the agency lead. You have no external voice to that. You will agree to the outcome of that agency. There's a conflict of interest in the advisory council system as it sits. And so I asked her a question, do you agree science should be independent of agency manipulation? because science cannot be part of those advisory councils, otherwise they're already in the status of accepting the outcome of the agency, one direction or the other, by the whim of the ruling political party. Now, I'm telling you I've told you just some stuff people don't even have a clue exists. It's one of our main problems. It's something we've run across in the work I do and the work that the colleagues come across that we have to do. We've had to address this. I believe I have some pretty high quality authority here to speak to you about it, and that you be careful about, again, the story here was about, well, we can get lost in the religiosity part about the EPA quoting a passage of the Bible when trying to break this up, but that's the media trying to focus your attention. The religiosity is a big joke. It's a big plant. It's a big psyop. Okay? So no matter who's using it is using it wrongly, no matter how it's being used. Inside the story or outside the story. What we're looking at is inside is a systemic condition. It's a methodology of a destruction that the government is actually keeping. And what they're trying to do is both separate it out so that the part of it can't actually be inside that does the most damage. And to that point, I have to agree with that part, but it doesn't fix the problem, as I told you. So I just want to know from a scientist, do you agree that science should be independent of agency manipulation? Because the advisory status is being manipulated by the outcome of the agency, by its very definition. So, does the scientist who has told us in her Twitters that she wants to educate people to science, does she respond? Well, no, absolutely not. And this is my problem with all of this stuff, so-called social networks. People don't really talk to each other. They're just, I don't know what people are doing. I don't even know what I'm doing. Part of it I don't understand. I don't have time to understand it. I'm still trying to figure out a theory to work on some strategy to boost my account there or my content over there on Minds.com. I've still got to work out that thing. I don't have time in my mind. I got too many other really important things to do at this point. Being run over by big deal problems. Can't get an answer out of a scientist over the basic foundational construction of how the government itself is destroying us. It's clearly identifiable. I mean, it doesn't, once you read some of the stuff, it doesn't take a lot to figure it out. It says that these processes do not meet obligations and duties of governments that are duty-bound to serve the people. It says it right in their documentation. It also says that these consensus processes do not come by way of constitutional provisions. I don't know why anybody reading or hearing that doesn't understand that's our problem. That is the pervasive system at this point. It happens locally to you. It's in your government. It's in how your government's working. And no one sees it. It's right in front of their face. They rather get into arguments over the minutia rather than look at the whole process that cannot meet any constitutional standard. Now, to make it less esoteric here, your code enforcement. When you go find out that the code enforcement can only be over the county's property in compliance with a comprehensive plan, why do you go in and argue that your pot water is being regulated, or how they can regulate the fences, or why that you can't grow so much? Why do you even entertain that when they can't enforce it on you anyway? The minutia is irrelevant to the fact they can't enforce a system that doesn't have the power to go touch you. You embrace that by arguing with it. Is that so hard to understand, folks? Really? I get a little bit frustrated just thinking about that. Do I enter into those meetings? No, because I'm dealing it's just the stinking abyss amplified. You got the mob rule people who want to protect their pot interests, and this is why I'm talking about this, because this seems to be what an email string came through here last week. Big meetings on how the government's going to try and shut down, even though it's supposed to be legalized. They're going to legalize it, all right. They're going to regulate it down into hardly doing anything. That's what I told you with the problem. But when you look at the code enforcement, and you find in their jurisdiction how that they don't have the authority, why do you walk in and talk about the benefits of pot? Why don't you just say you can't have the authority to enforce this enforcement program? Because I'm not, my property is not your jurisdiction, and you're taking my stuff without right. You have no way to even come close to be discussing this. You don't have title to my property. You don't have privity to my property. It's private. Against the whole and entire world, including you, Mr. or Mrs. Commissioner. Why don't we talk about that instead? No. We're going to talk about the color of the pills they're trying to feed us, how big they are, what color bottle they fit in. I am frustrated because this is the whole and entire point. I've been talking to you all, and I see not anybody hardly. I don't get enough feedback apparently to really say anybody. So I'm just going to say it really the ultimate. I don't see anybody actually understanding how to do this more properly and then distancing themselves from that authorita. As soon as you do that, they're done. They're done when they can't show the authority. Now they bring themselves into felony action against you. I guess I'm so hesitant to give you folks such clear answers without any feedback that you're all reading what you need to be reading. I really know it's not a good idea to hand you the guns. I want to read something to you that should make this really clear, but until you've read it for yourself and kind of mulled it over, I don't want to give you answers. I mean, ultimate discussion about how it's not a question. I've told you before, this is not about making an issue. This is about showing that someone else is a criminal against your rights. Why? Because you know how to assert them. You don't even worry. There's no concern about the birth certificate, about whether you're a person, about whether or not you've got certain color on your skin. It has nothing to do with any of that. They have you all, whether you like Trump, or whether you don't, or whether you think Hillary's cankles are beautiful. It doesn't matter. None of that matters to anything I'm talking about. And I see people talking about it over and over and over. It doesn't matter. What matters is how you present how they don't have an authority and then you present how what you have is, and prevailingly so. So you go in and you talk about the color of the drapes instead of not talking about the fact that they're a criminal trespasser to know that I had drapes. You start talking with Satan. You start having conversation with Satan. You're going to lose. It's all told us about this. I don't know why this is really a problem, and I am frustrated, so I'm going to move on. It's right there for us, folks. It's all right there. We can agree to the dialogue. We can agree that it's even there, and then we don't realize we've already slipped into the stinking abyss over it. We slipped into the stinking abyss when we said, but it turns out. Of course it turns out because you were unaware, and you're still unaware. It didn't turn out if you saw the fraud in the beginning. Would it? Think about that, folks. If you knew, were actually knowledgeable, and you saw the crime happening, you wouldn't say it turned out. You'd have said, you're under arrest. At least I'm hoping so. Alright? I mean, there's a different, quick way to get through this. No question. No issue. No issue. No issue, no court. In fact, when you go with a remedy, you go with no issue, because it's a matter of self-evident matter of law. And what you're asserting is that they had no right to trespass. And I told you one of the documents that we've put in, the answer to the document saying you had no right was you're right, we had no right. And then they go and ask the court, but so what, court? Give us the right. Now, what authority does the court have to do that? The only court authority there would be the criminal authority, the authority of a criminal. And that's what we've outed in that system as well. And that court has been put on notice of that problem in 3 different ways. Again, don't insult the intelligence of an officer who may be doing good, but you call them out for the fact of their potential to do a trespass of the law itself. In other words, they've destroyed your whole society by that decision. Do you know how that fact is? Do you understand how a county coming after code regulation in your property is a destruction of the very thing that they are existing for? Do you know how to say that? Do you know how to put it together? They're talking again on and on, this global plan. They got the plan that's going on, and it's going on right in front of your face. But we'd rather go hype up Antifa, get involved, get in armor, go fight in the streets amongst each other, instead of realizing there's a real big evil coming through. And it's winning the day, and there's nothing secret about it. Nothing. I mean, literally nothing. In this case, I'll get to the point. There's actually a monument that we all talk about. We'll talk about it. We won't understand how it works together, or how it's working together. and beyond even my comprehension that it's even can be feasible. But it's happening. I can't deny it at all. DHS is buying. I want you to consider this on a global governance level, folks. This is all tied together. If you don't understand what I do in the broadcast, it's tied together. If you want to entertain a probability and possibility, I suppose I could say you could be closed off and not care. If you don't care, I don't know what good you are to yourself. I don't know about how you can live a life when you're looking around not caring. But that's not my decision. At any rate, the DHS is buying a new database to store biometrics for 500 million people. I could read these stories, but they're storing biometrics. That's the future. They want the biometrics. No doubt that the iPhone 10 does what it does. The point is they're making databases for 500 million. What focused me here on this was the DHS is a terror institution looking for biometrics, which is technocracy, and they wanted to have one for 500 million people. What triggers in your mind when I say, for those of you that have been studying all this stuff and keep it together, and I won't answer. You can put it in the chat rooms if you want. You can tell it to yourself. What other thing do we know we've been told about? There's a monument to this that says that uses the number 500 million. Is what came to my mind as soon as I saw that. Sent out a Twitter, so you can see that's not me talking like I see it after the fact. As soon as I see this, I send out what sounds relevant. It ends up making. Now I'm realizing I can make some of this make part of the broadcast. It helps to guide this conversation. I'd like to call your attention. I'm sending on Twitter to a gentleman who sent out a Twitter, and it speaks to this article about the DHS buying a new database to store 500 biometrics for 500 million people. Remember now, 500 million people on a database requires hardware. And I am wondering about all that. I actually move a point across, say, well, apparently they're not worried about hardware failure either across time. So that indicates this might be coming along pretty quickly. I can't conceive how, but they are deciding to put this thing along pretty quickly. 500 million. What's the population of the United States? But some like 320 million. How long will it take us to get to 500 million? So this hardware, they're not even considering that the hardware would wear out before this database could actually be even close to being used up. So what are they talking about? DHS on a global level? Terrorism? Well, 500 million. Let's go back to that number. Why only 500 million? It can't be for the United States in any time soon. Our diminishing reproductive rates. So what is this really maybe tied to? But it occurred to me, the other number I've seen, the other place I've seen it was where? On the Georgia Guidestones. And so I send back to this Twitter post, I'd like to call your attention to the timing of this article about the DHS to the minor quinky-dink relative to the Guidestones. And another Twitter post that I put where I'm saying this timing must not be too considered about the hardware they're going to need, wearing out, replacing it, maybe changing completely. You know, there's technologies on the horizon that are really phenomenal. They can put this amount of data on a chip again. I mean, the way that we're told the technology is. Well, why are they rushing to do this now? But 500 million is the number. It's short of 500 million on the Guidestones. So, quinky-dink, folks. Does it mean anything? Can't tell you. No proof. Why? It doesn't make sense. Except that it correlates to this 500 million, and what are we correlating with? What they're doing on a world stage. They're actually destroying what they are telling you. They don't even know about reality. That the reality you thought doesn't exist. What did I tell you coming up here years and years ago? You're not going to know. You're up from your down. From the inside, from the outside. You're not going to have any place that you can trust. And I said that's going to mean that you're going to have to trust in something, and it's going to have to be something a whole lot more solid than anything around you. It certainly can't be a trust in your inadequacies. You're going to have to anchor someplace. Take a safe harbor with this thing coming on. And so they're showing us at least an indication that the number correlates pretty well with the global capacities that they have planned to have happen. And so how do you think this starts to happen? I mean, what is the mechanisms and evidences of all this? And I told you one of them, be careful of the plagues you're going to hear about. I said they're going to be increasing. They're actually going to end up being epidemics, but they're going to fire them up as plagues. They're going to be in things that you see where the government comes in and starts wiping people out, and they're going to have their plausible deniability statement. It's most likely going to be based in the war on terror, but as that's the pretext for their war of terror against everyone. Billions and billions worth of people. So part of this thing we were talking about last week as well comes falling out of the Kennedy documents is this little thing about this little pipsqueak of a place being created, and at the same time of that week being created by the Balfour Declaration, and how they're going about to show you that they can take you down on a national level, even if you're not a nation, but at least an area, and take your land from you because you don't understand what you're up against. And there's bigger bullies in the world than you anyway. One of the things that you have to look at the sandbox fight going on with North Korea. That kid over there in that sandbox ain't going to let the bully let the bully take the knife out of his hand that he's using to protect himself from the big bully. He's not going to do it. That's just a natural dynamic. I don't see what the problem is. A lot of people have a problem with it, but I don't see the problem with it. I would not take and disarm myself in the face of a bully, not when I had it in my hand. I don't know if anybody else would either, so it's not natural. But they're going to push the unnatural. Let's put it that way. So, but they push it by what? They push it by giving us examples of how they've been doing it. This is a repeated story. The revolution, folks, it's a wheel that has to be broke. We've got to stop that. It's really, I wanted to say it's no joke. That's the reality they want to tell you they don't understand, is the thing that they're doing to you, and you want to deny because they haven't given the authority, the experts hadn't said. Now they're all confused and they're changing the scenario on you, and you're going to kind of sit there and say, oh, that's dumb, but you're not going to think farther beyond about that to say, wait a minute, that means they're doing something. Walls and militarized police, how Israel is exporting its occupation to the United States. Should be about all you need to hear, as we talked about last week for sure, but Israel is a creation of Britain for its objects as a colonialization tool, and it's coming back home. I told you everything in the Middle East is going to come home. It's going to come home to roost, and what you see over there is you think is being destruction. What you don't see it here in the United States is the destruction you will see. You're going to see it differently, but you will see the destruction nonetheless. The techniques that this tool develops are coming home to roost. This is not even new again, but it's now being more put in your face about how, because it's now becoming law. United States Senate Bill 720 is set to punish any individual or company that boycott Israel for its violation of Palestinian human rights. Israeli footprints are becoming more apparent in the United States security apparatus. Such a fact does not bode well for ordinary people from the United States. What is the opening structure? I'll let you read the rest. If you can't see the fact of that, this author apparently does. If you can't see the fact of this thing and you're not responding to it, you're going to be controlled by it. They have their ways, folks, and we're not being responsive to them. If you can't see the Palestinian problem is your problem, you're not really paying attention. I really don't know what more to say. You don't understand that you're a prisoner in your own land when you don't understand, or you think you have to go down to a county commissioner and argue with them over how much control they're putting over your land. That, to me, is an occupying force. And if you don't know that, then you haven't read enough to find that. And if you haven't found that, then you're just a prisoner. You're no different than a prisoner. Only you're a different type prisoner. You're actually being used as a beast of burden. They're actually parasitically eating off of you. Like I've told you, they've been eating off of you. And none of them have any authority or power actually to put it in, except the power of the gun they'll deny to you that the Second Amendment said you had to have in order to stop it. Am I bringing up the Second Amendment use? No, I say you're not intelligent enough to go there. Because if you were intelligent, you wouldn't have to go there. I want you to think really deeply on that one. that we aren't doing anything is a problem. You can't go to the worst answer. That you just allow these things to come down and do the minutia, fight on the minutia, where there's a question. You give someone the ability to make a decision, and you don't understand why it went against you, and you feel all violated, but you handed them the power. What did Scalia tell us? Just shocking to even hear him. Not shocking in the truth. It's just shocking that he actually admitted to the fact before he was offed, and not because of that. What did he say? He said, "Well, you brought the question to us. Don't blame me for deciding it." And I told you then, there's the notice of how the system works. And I said, that proves to you don't bring an issue to the court. You bring a non-issue before someone that has to control someone who's in trespass. You don't bring a question, an issue, to the court. You bring a settled matter and remedy, or for remedy. That's not a silver bullet. The point is you don't walk in and give someone else an opinion. When I write paperwork myself, I don't give the judge an opinion to have. When the other side answers with their opinion, I expose it for the opinion that doesn't have the power against the self-evident fact and matter of law point that they had no right to even answer again. The very act of the answer under the color of authority to be able is a felony. So you can get all lost into what you're being told in the media or the anti-media or whatever, the alt-right, whatever. You can get all into all that, and it's not going to take you one step further to resolve these problems. And you don't think that this occupation Israel's exporting to the U.S. doesn't come local to you? You're really not paying close attention at all. At all. So, don't be surprised here in the near future, for those of you that get to enjoy and suffer this extortion, police to use oral drug testing to arrest thousands of motorists. A recent article in the Detroit CBS Local reveals that police in 5 counties are preparing to launch a 1-year drug testing pilot program using drug recognition experts, or DREs. Folks, I don't know what to say more than, do you think that these experts say are going to be any more valuable information and trustable as any other experts that say? Remember, I did the broadcast here just recently, though it's not the first time I've talked about experts say. The experts don't tell you reality. They tell you what they want you to know or what they want to accomplish. Now, this is an expansion on all. I get to look at your pupils and the dilation. I get to subjectively say whether or not that you are under the influence to go ahead and do the drug test, which we find out at least 50% of the time they're no good. We got the reports on past broadcasts about all that. Well, I don't do anything wrong. Folks, I told you they're going to invent things wrong. Oh, your eyes don't look quite so dialed. Oh, they're a little bit off. They're a little bit, well, get the flashlight out of my face. How's that? Oh, no, they have every evidence of them, as an expert say, to get you into their database, folks. The Biometrics. Remember, don't forget how this is tied together. And it's all done on a fraud. When you get to your land law, you're going to find out, get to your road use or highway use laws, not your motor vehicle code, and you go in your state and find the fact that those highway uses are granted, prevailing so against the state and on it as an obligation and duty to protect. When you find that, make yourself the short list. Don't accept their presumption that you're in commerce, that you have to be underneath some kind of a guidance, and they get to put this nonsense on you, subjective belief. Remember, AIDS was determined the same way. You look on the product data sheet. The product data sheet says, oh, it's a subjective clinical analysis of whether or not you have it. So all this non-law works against you. And I hear nary a peep about how that is in anybody's life, hardly. But here it goes, folks. They're going to get you more opportunity to do an experiment on you, and they have the right to experiment on their lab rats, those humans. Human resources that they use as revenue generation, develop just to suck your life away, whether that's in money, whether that's in control, whether that's in forcing associations with other entities. And what about that forced association, folks? Isn't that supposed to be something that you're not supposed to be forced to do? And I'm telling you, when you're not able to enjoy that, you better relook at your reality. Because not even the experts understand it. And the ones that you thought you did, they're reinventing what that reality was. Hell, I can't even say hell because it don't exist now. Why? Because one man in a robe and a costume said so. Now, it may not have ever existed before. Maybe why he says it. But what about all the people in all this time that bought into that learned wrong in a bad way? Because now they're all psychologically into the ritual of it all. Wow, these people know how to do this. They really know how to play you like a fiddle. The devil goes down to Georgia sometimes, doesn't it? So Detroit is not maybe the only place. So here we are, folks. You're going to get into this one-year drug testing pilot program. These are all stoppable. You just got to step up. I'm sure there's some people that listened to me for a long time in Detroit. I know a couple, at least one or two hosts that were up there. Instead of focusing on the birth certificate and the capitalized name and all that, why don't you go after the right that they don't have here, the power they have to interfere with your right of use of the road? Identifying you as not someone's subject. Figure that, get that one written down. That's what you want, because they're trying to ignore that one. It's in the law too, but they're not gonna. They don't deal in the omission. They don't deal in the absence of something. In other words, these things you put on your car, it calls their attention to the fact of your amenability, your agreement, your consent to these things that they're putting on you. What they haven't been told is that when they see the absence of it, they have to look for other factors before they can impose upon you. That's inside the code too. Do I hear anybody talk about that? No. And partly I can see why. If you don't understand how to bring out the omission that causes your harm, you're not going to understand how to advance the problem and show the people that are the people, and then those that are in the system that they're doing harm and wrong. And then you say, well, why? Because there's nobody there. Well, because we need thousands of us, folks. I can't even imagine what the system would do to have thousands of equity remedies running over. They would all have to be scheduled before their court trials. And if you understand about what extraordinary remedies do, they command the docket, and they command the docket in order that they came in at that level. And people don't even think this through. We got this oppressor. How are we going to muck up the works while we're working it out? It's not that hard to figure out. Just get involved. But you're going to have to do it in these numbers. The more harm that there is, the more places they are, the more numbers it's going to take us. So here they got every way to get you tied up into the system on their subjective basis. These experts say. Experts aren't telling you reality. They're telling you what they're paid for, what they're paid to do. They're just like political lobbyists. They're executives of policy. I've been through all that. I wrote about this back in 2000 about policy, the police, all that stuff, how it's all not law. It's all this policy that your legislatures only make policy, not law now. Everyone wants to know, well, how do you prove a corporation? I don't need to know about the capital letter name. All I need to know is that they're not making law no more. And you go find out why. It ties to this a corporate law, this bill that they put in, the Model Business Corporation Act. The bar did all that to you for you folks. It's all there to read. I don't even know what the question is at some point. I've been talking long enough. The broadcast should be knocking them over. It should be the thing that everyone tries to interfere with. I should be knocking them over with this information for people to actually put in their hand and go do something with that works. It works to get their attention, if nothing else, and that you've got the answer right and you can't be spun off. No, everyone wants to go off all the other things, all the other trails. So they get you on a subjective basis, they pull you in, they're going to put you in prison, but here's what the point is. Don't take it lying down, and you might start getting somewhere. See, it takes people doing something. They put you in prison, and they go into this public-private partnership prisoning. And we find out, again, I've told you, these public-private partnerships are felonies against you. I don't care what they are, how they are justified. They attempt to try and skirt things as well. But when you don't like it and you do the proper thing, you can expose that it's wrong what they're doing. The United States secretive private prison industry is about to become much less secretive. When we talked about the FOIAs and the open records requests, this is along the vein to start outing these people that are in government that think their job is to make you to be a host to their parasiticism, to invoke upon you policies that are not law, to shove you, defame your character, to put you into a place and a status that you are not in order to that, so that would be so. I've explained some of the methods by how you prove that's the fact of the defamation, that the fraud against you, that was a fraud on the court. In other words, there is no due process that they can provide to protect you against it. That's fraud on the court. Not fraud on the court. It speaks to due process. I've explained a lot of this. Someone sends out a FOIA that gets turned down. Remember, we said they're attacking now the people who put Freedom of Information Act or Open Records request. They claim with a pretext that they're protecting people. All you have to know is what that's supposed to mean. I told you it had to do with they had a protection against public disclosure of private information. If you know that answer and you're prepared for it, you can defeat a lot of this nonsense. Well, this was, does a corporation working in the interest of a government for its prisons, do they have to give out information? And this court case shows, in fact, that they do. They do. They have to give up this information. The Supreme Court ruled against CCA and GEO, which attempted to block the Freedom of Information Act requests by government watchdog groups. You don't have to be a group, folks. It helps when you're in groups if you want to work together and share the workload. But you can do this on your own, and you may have to take this on your own as well to the courts, because this is going to the court. Had to go to the Supreme Court to get this done. And so this is a different style problem. You're always speaking through the Bar Association as well, you see. But in fact, these Freedom of Information requests are attachable to private interests doing public functions. The decision marked a breakthrough for the Center of Constitutional Rights. The Center of Constitutional Rights is an organization which filed the lawsuit in 2013 after two governmental agencies refused to release information about the detention bed quota, a little-known mandate that requires government agents to fill 34,000 bed immigrant detention centers across the country. So we see this quota. We've heard about these contracts before, where they're going to they want to fill these prisons so the prison industry can make its profits. The government's complicit with it, and then you should not underestimate the power of running a pilot program that, upon some experts say about your pupils, gets you involved to the point where, through that corrupt system, you are maybe fill in one of those quotas that you may or may not know about. You probably don't know about it because you didn't file the FOIA. Now, there's an idea here that you would necessarily want, before you make a plea, you would want all these things filed into the case as a question of what are you agreeing to when you entered a plea into a jurisdiction. That's after you challenged that you had it. That you could actually work this out, I believe, in a criminal case once you were hit. You could work out ahead of time what they do wrong, and you can then expose it by asking through the court for defense for the plea to be entered so that you are fully disclosed on what you're pleading into and what the jurisdiction is about. It was similar to a nature and cause request, which they try to deny a lot, but work out that problem. It seems to me that you would be able to use this disclosure to inform your decision on the plea you would enter. And so I'm, again, developing these things as I think about it. As we get beat down, we have things we can do. In fact, I'm looking now, I've got to see in the future, and something else came up, and I've thrown an equity remedy inside a traffic case. And we're going to see how the defense of an equitable remedy inside of a code enforcement is going to fly within a system I think is completely corrupt, but one I can expose for that very point. And that they've been put on notice, they will be doing so to follow the habit that's been formed by the government. See, unless you're in it, you can't push on the walls of this prison and try to find the weak spot and break out. And then I want to point out that you're not really in the prison. Understand that there is no spoon, and so there's a duality here that you have to kind of work through in a way that you do that so that it takes some of the pressure off. But the pressure is really there because you're actually looking and you're addressing the criminals that are defeating everyone essentially. Public-private partnership is the worst thing that could ever come onto this country. They validated it somehow. It's a felony against you. It's treason. So they make stuff up. They give themselves the power. It's an unrighteous and unlawful power. And they say, well, where's there's no law? Yeah, that's because you don't assert any. You don't persist in it. You get yourself in places where you almost have to give in to doing it. As I've said, I've had to find my own way. I had to decide instead of having the eagle destroy the lizard here, I had to let him take a little bit of my tail so I could live another day. I could do things another day, maybe a different way to get them to pluck their feathers a little bit over time. I'm just not that big, but I can pluck feathers. And I think we've been doing a lot more than that, and certainly with my colleagues, the chicken's ready for market pretty quick. But they create this stuff. I've been telling you folks that, I have nothing to hide. Why would they be wasting their time to search me out? No, they make stuff up, folks, is the problem. And so here's some more evidence when you're going on in this big database there with the biometrics and all this. So you think that your psychological profile is not a biometric they use by how you write, and that what you do and what you say and how you say it isn't going into some place for some sort of an analysis, and that it's done in real time. We now have the evidence that Do No Evil Google is all part of that real time interference now with what you do. And it came through an interesting little set of tweets. Question: has anyone had Google Docs lock you out of a doc before? My draft of a story about wildlife crime was just frozen for violating their terms of service. Think about that. The draft she's writing is real-time locked out on her so that she can't continue it because it purportedly, without any input, had been viewed to be violating the terms of service. Another Twitter that I got that from, Google, what is you doing? Was the tweet, and pointing out two other images of an interference that Google was doing real time to drafts. They weren't even published. Violating the terms of service is Google looking at your stuff while you do it. Oh, what do I do? Who cares? I don't care. Folks, they take your text, they interfered with it. They read it as they're going. They got algorithms doing this. They also most likely would have people watching in if it becomes any kind of a mark against something. They are censoring your ability to have speech through that platform. I mean, anybody that continues dealing in Google, I have to wonder about you. I mean, are your intent or your mental fitness? There's proof now. They're real time. They're watching what you do. They write what you write. You can't even write an idea and then even get to the point to delete it. They will interfere with what your creative capacity is putting out. Well, let me put it a little bit softer. I can't believe anybody would be feeling okay with someone having the right to be looking over your shoulder, actually looking through your keyboard, real time, to interfere with a creative process that you thought you were going through. Why would you put yourself through that potential harassment? I mean, I can't even handle a computer program starting up on its own in my system, wanting to come in and say, oh, I've got something to help you with. Just stay out of my system. maybe give me a little notice that I may be paying attention, but don't just start firing stuff up. Don't inject a lot of stuff into my system. That's why I didn't Google Chrome. And that put a bad taste in my mouth over Chrome. Google Chrome, when I went to go look at a thing, it just dumped a bunch of Google Chrome stuff on my system. And then it started interfering with my settings. I don't need that kind of frustration, folks. I don't need that kind of insight. Oversight, help, whatever they want to call it. And yet people, by the millions, agree to this system and to do it this way. I don't know why we continue to allow it. It's just your participation. What's your vote? Don't participate. There's an interesting case coming down. They're going to be challenging whether or not, I don't understand how they're going to do this, but we'll see how the courts, whatever the Bar Association declares, about whether or not they can do censoring. I don't see how they can. It's like you walking into a private store. If they don't want you swearing in their store, then they can kick you out, I suppose. I don't see what the difference is. I guess we can go through the minutia of an issue. But you walk into a store and you get what they sell you. You get what they offer. And if you don't like it, you leave. And if you don't like it, they make a ruckus, they can kick you out. I don't understand why that doesn't hold here. This is not a government function. The only other thing I can see is within the constraint, the possibility is that they use, but even so, this would be like a private company, cable company. Inside the utility of the public way, through the public utilities, there's this right that you have to travel along it. That doesn't necessarily say you may have the right to travel, but that may not give you the right against censorship when you go to a particular business, in this case Google, any website. I'm not going to get in, I don't know that. What I'm saying here, let's not lose the point, the very real, absolute point. These people have created a system that looks at your inputs real time to make decisions on what you are intending to do. And to lock you out of that is now beyond a doubt. There's no question this is going on. It's not just a censorship out, and we're not going to let you put it up your content at all. This is allowing you to only go as far as they want you to go. Forget posting it. This was just working it out. She was actually saying she was doing the draft so she could work it out before she presented it somewhere else. It wasn't even going to be something that she was posting on the internet, if I remember that one part. So this is not about you having anything to hide. This is about someone interfering with what you want to get done, making up stuff about how you want to get, what you want to say. They said it violated the terms of service. If you look at the terms of service, that's not a good thing. They essentially defamed your character by saying that you were essentially violating a law. So you want to live in the AI world, folks, you can have it. Really, you can have it. The way they suck up data now is just amazing. And that's just on the side that we're talking, the one side. Remember, they can use it against you too. Wherever you go, they can filter the amount of information that you have. But we have more going on about the intelligence services behind the scenes. Declassified docs show NSA trying to prosecute a journalist for his successful FOIA requests. So here we got to go do the FOIA, but now they're trying to go after the journalists who are doing the requests. The NSA is involved. Well, folks, that's Google. So you're a journalist, or you're a blogster, and you typing this stuff in drafts. They've got the indictment being written as you type, and that's not what you're doing, is it? But they make it up. It's the point and the problem of the integration with this system. NSA, I can't see is any different than any of these big companies on the internet. In fact, we find that they're all really they were started where I could not figure out, like for an idea like YouTube, because I had the idea before YouTube to have a YouTube, and I looked out and I looked at the costs. I said, I don't even know how to get this thing started. The costs are astronomical, and it wasn't even an idea yet. And then YouTube fires up. And then Google comes in and Google buys YouTube, and I started looking at the background, and these guys are all supported by the government. That's how you do it. I just wasn't connected. So it stifles, this whole thing can stifle independent development as well as also own it, as the government controls it. You don't even have a chance to get in to have the idea that they already get to go and control in a big, big way. There's no way, there's no market way to make this thing work. So any of these companies that got this big that fast, maybe even those that survived the so-called dot-com bubble, they must have to be really tied to the government somewhere. That's the funds. This is that experts say none. This is where the scientists come to the house of cards thing. I think we're coming to that day in the intelligence sector. They're looking at your stuff in real time, making stuff up about you. And when you come after them in anything substantive way, they come back after at you. I've told you, you've got to prepare for this. I'm not saying this, in fact, to prosecute the prosecutors are going after journalists that make successful requests. I'm not saying not to make those requests. This is the battlefield. If you don't see the government as being the enemy at this point, I don't know what to say. It's not the government either. It's those in government that have taken on the mantle of this authority and power to do so. They need to be stopped. Yeah, I see the story. I don't want to read it. I can read it. I don't want to read it. Understand that you're going to be out in the world and you're going to integrate with this thing they call government, and they're going to come out, find ways, if you start getting close, to take you down. And even if they're not, if they got 34,000 beds in prison to support, they're going to be looking to make stuff up. This is not even a new story. Remember, right after the Boston bombing, what'd you have? You have people, women going to work and looking at rice cookers while the husband is looking at backpacks, and the son is interested by the Boston bombing, so he's on the internet looking, and next thing they know that they've got a knock on the door by the police wondering what's the next bombing incident they were planning. Now, luckily that didn't go farther than being crazy, but that was just a few years ago. Remember, it doesn't work so simple as time goes on. They learn how to encroach a lot more. In fact, to the point where they're looking at your pupils, and they'll be trained to understand whether or not you're in there under the influence to go ahead and take your biometric information by force. And what did you do to show the distinction that you were not underneath that commercial liability? What did you do? I just gave you some little lead on how to go about doing that in your state. I don't know why there's anybody listening to me that wouldn't focus in on that, since you got to use that service, your own right to use the road probably every day. Not much different than as important as air and water. What I mentioned to you about your code enforcement, if you aren't digging through your code, the contested case side of your of how they're going to enforce those codes on the hearing side, and to find out they don't have that jurisdiction, I don't know what you're listening to me for. I don't know what you're doing in your life. You should be doing that to protect your property. It should be cause number one of the wrong that you need to make right. You need to then persist in making the record that they can't do that. That's going to lead you into a whole lot of other stuff. It's going to show you, you're going to find out you have I've been talking about it, they're called the patent. Let's give it to you right here. Go to your patent, it's one on every land. I don't care what you claim is the excuse that you can't get one. There's one there through a lineage of possessions. You identify that you are an assignee from the front to the back, whether or not you perfect the process. No one else can make that claim anyway. And then you go find out whether or not that interest, the one that you can find your chain of title back through to the beginning where the patent is, or the state deed, and you see within the statutes for how they will prosecute a due process, what they call due process in contested cases, because I don't know of anyone yet that they're bringing property cases through the judicial side first. And if they are, you can just find the judicial side restriction. But contested cases is only over certain things. And you're going to have to go to a few statutes probably to find that out. But once you find out that their scope of their hearings cannot embrace your property, how are they going to do code enforcement against you? How is that law, could it be meant for you? Is that making sense, folks? I mean, you thinking as I'm talking, or are you just not? Until we get this type of a mind back, and I don't even know how much more mind like this we need. This is the one I have at this point that seems to see pretty clearly now how to go ferret out what the problem is. The lie, the duping that we've been beat down with. it just lays itself right out once you start to see it. And I'm not saying that they put it in big red shining neon bulbs when you read it. You're talking black and white, and it's like and dry and boring, and they did that on purpose too. But to me, it's got a whole different mission. There's a whole mission behind what I'm telling you needs to be done. We each need to have this power in us. Once we have that, there is no issue before a third party to decide it. There's no one that can be our judge. It's not that there's not to be any judge against us. We have to be worthy that there is no judge. And I'm asking you to consider these conditions, these methods on how you do that for yourself. Really stand up into what your responsibility. You want to be free, you have to stand up into the responsibility to be so. Otherwise you just are in a dumb free. You're in a range of motion within a constraint that you've agreed to be placed in or put yourself in. So that, again, it's about fabricating ability to have information available that fabricates an issue in order to push forward an agenda they have, and part of this thing is to create more victims to this suffering with regard to the system of injustice. Just us. Not just cause, just us. I've said this all over and over again. So again, questioning these authorities. There's an interesting conundrum that everyone seems to get wrapped up in. Well, what if the one who's in the office doesn't have the right to be there? As all their decisions null and void? Well, here's a little evidence. I've been telling you that that wouldn't be the case. And this all came up with the unqualified one when there was a big, and that was never proven that he was not qualified for the office or whatever. That was never answered. But I told you at the time that even if he's found de facto in the office, his decisions will stand. Here's an evidence in another country called Australia, where this apparently has been so for quite a while, and it was just found out that the Australian Senate President forced to resign over surprise British citizenship. Now, they try to show you that these governments are separate. Now, it's an interesting thing. Apparently, by their political governments, they're separate between Britain and Australia. But the Queen sends the governors to all these protectorates. So, they're not that much removed. But the President of the upper house of Australia's Parliament has been forced out of office, the 6th MP, to be tossed out in the last week. So these are de facto officers given their reason. The reason for the ejection, the MP was found to be a British citizen through his father, a fact he wasn't aware of until now, which has made him ineligible to sit in the Australian Parliament. Given the story, this guy was completely clueless, did not know he was a British citizen through his father, because he was always knowing he was brought up in an island nearby, Australia, Tasmania. Okay? But my point on all this discussion is, look through the article and you will never see any question on whether or not his decisions, while he was not supposed to be in the office due to this ineligibility, none of those decisions that were made or he was part of will be overthrown because he was not properly and lawfully in that office. This is the problem of the de facto officer. I say it's a problem. It's when you find out that the fact of things is negated by the law of a thing and it doesn't make a difference, then you start, I say, from my perspective, I noticed that's one of the ways that they cause an adultery to your system that you can't actually remedy. You have people that are in the fact of the office without the law of the office, and their decisions are still okay. Should give you a message on how the Bar Association and the legal system has made their occupation okay. See, if they didn't say it that way, their occupation couldn't be made okay. And so I told you a long time ago, even if the unqualified one was found unqualified, his decisions weren't going to be undone. They would just be part of the process. And one of the rationale was because if you were to change it, it would disrupt society so much as to make a bigger problem, which I thought was, to me, after reading enough of this information, sounded to me one of the lamest ideas I'd ever seen. If you have a bunch of people making de facto decisions under the fact of law, but not the law itself, and they've made decisions that run you over into the stinking abyss, you can't fix that because of that point? Well, what happened to the contractual point of unconscionability anyway. So there's a whole other way to look at what they've done and why people kind of go down the track. Oh, we're going to get rid of all this bad law that's been signed. No, in actuality, they've fabricated a rationalization that even the fact of an official without the law is sufficient to make whatever actions they have said and done lawful, because they claim there will be a greater harm to overthrow it. Again, these are these theories that they've never actually tested. The only harm would actually be rectifying the law, wouldn't it? And yet they deny that and I'm just telling you, is because once you found out that you're sitting in a complete occupation, that's just the small nubbins of the occupation. That's a small officer. I'm telling you, your whole system is an occupation, especially in the United States when you find this. If you identified that, you'd have to undo the whole thing from back then. That would really kind of throw things into a lurch. But see, this is also imposing upon you their elite, their high-mindedness of their own self, not believing you had the capacity as the people yourselves to make it fix it and then fix it correctly. And so you hear another exaltism of these controllers who would change reality around you and justify it, just like the Pope just did, just like the scientists are doing. All these house of cards are falling, so they're just coming out. We're just going to redraw the picture for you here. Here, why don't you just shake this up a little bit more and look at it in this light? You'll see look at the cloud. See the bunny in the cloud. Oh no, it looks like an elephant. See the elephant in the cloud now? Yeah, that's all they're doing right now. We tend to want to go along with it. So, back to the de facto officer. An officer in fact, but not in law, does not undo the decisions made by that officer. And here was a little proof. I just want to bring that to y'all on how they work the occupation in order to continue this whole charade, however you want to pronounce it. It says charade here in the United States. It's got long vowels in that word. Charade, I guess, also. So, funny language speak. But we have the licenses the system is given to itself in order to keep control, and no one speaks out against this. But for me, when I started walking through this, I started to notice these were the tools of control. This is how they ameliorate what were glaring crimes, essentially, against the consent of a people who thought they were doing. They were organized in a way to advance benefits to themselves. And in the United States, like I said, get to land law, that were actually literally better than anywhere else in the world. Because in this case, you hold this property against and to the exclusion of everyone else, even the governments. Now, there are two provisions, the eminent domain and the police power, but those can be addressed. I don't want to discuss all of that. They can be addressed. And then there's a rationale behind them as well. I don't agree with the Fifth Amendment the way it's stated, the way it does, but actually, and I don't agree with how these same usurpers have circumvented the actual requirements of the Fifth Amendment to make it truly protective. But I don't agree with when you assign something forever that the Fifth Amendment could interfere. But when the totality of this thing works out underneath the exigence that's supposed to rise up in order to make all else fail, otherwise you have destruction of everything, essentially, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. On the way it works, though, in practice, no, these things were detriments inside our own Constitution, which we never really understood, or if we did, we gave license to, like that 3/5 of a person thing. Yeah, figured that one out. And yet everybody said that was okay. So one of the reasons is the government in Australia is doing some checks on the background, and that's why all of a sudden the sixth MP is thrown out, because they're not actually of Australian birth, or so-called Australian citizens, and so that they're out of office is them doing their own FOIA on their own selves now and getting the information. So it shows when you dig into the information of the government, it's important to get that, not your opinion, but to get the documents. No different than we find out now it's, Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset. It's right out of their documents. That's a confession right out of their own official documents. And this is what I want people to go for those better and as quickly as possible, as opposed to their opinion on what they think they understand, or to speak from what they think they do. In fact, I've got to check myself sometimes. I'll make a statement, go, I really can't prove that. It sounds right now. There's some collateral evidence, but, I really can't prove that. Let me hold back on that little, whatever that little thing is I'm holding back on. I want to get the proof. In fact, documents I know that other people have, I won't let someone make that claim that I've been told they're making until I can see the fact, and I know that they're telling me the truth because they're using it, but I won't actually make the claim that they're making that they can prove because I can't prove it. And this is how strict you start having to get to be. And I attempt to try and make sure I don't do any extraneous statements that aren't provable someplace, somehow, somewhere. Not from my opinion, but the facts of where you can find them. So, the de facto officer is still an officer. And so your decisions are going to be whatever it is. And I noticed as I was coming through learning for that few decades, that was another tool. It was a tool of destruction they could use to destroy you by bringing people in. And when you're found out, who cares? You kick them out. You either probably put another person in that may be just as problematic. If not, you've done what your dirty deed was meant to do. See, that's all you cared. Any advance is what you're looking at. So even if you last had a de facto officer for a month and they got some decisions made that couldn't be readily fixed, and typically that would be too fast. They could fix that pretty quickly, but I mean over time, outside of one, let's say, term or some sort, they've got in what they wanted to get in by that de facto officer, and it's very difficult to undo those. And you can just see the tool of destruction made into the system that I want you to be aware of on this point. As that little story pops up so many years later to show us that they had no question of what his actions weren't even going to be questioned. In all honesty, he didn't know, but still, by law, it doesn't matter. So you show the frailty of law is, I guess, the point I want to make out. Well, but that's the, what do you call, the intangible. Not so frail as that tangible thing. And I said that's where we get down to that land, that law that made the land exclusive. And again, I say that let's start there because that gives us a true distinction between what is exclusive and against the whole world, as all these other things that pop up that are administrative, codified impositions of policy. See, as long as we have that gray, the so-called gray area about it, we'll not ever see how they're really pulling this off about us. So when lawmakers go and look at their own system, it's amazing what they find. They're finding out in Australia that a lot of their MPs shouldn't even be in the office. Weeks ago, I had a tab. I'm going to go to there. When lawmakers looked into the Kansas child care foster system, they were shocked to learn that 70+ children were missing from Kansas's foster care system. So the information's there, but if you're not asking about it, you don't understand that maybe the train came off the rails quite a long time ago, and what you thought was going on certainly could not be going on. This is spoke a little bit to me because of my originations of finding out that the child care systems are really they're just a cover for a crime, and a lot of this pedophilia stuff seems to kind of exude. You've been hearing very quiet. It's silent on this issue, but these foster families, as I was able to find, was going to make a documentary upon until they stomped on me pretty good. Started to expose a lot of this way back when, around 2000 or so. But here it is now. The Kansas lawmakers are shocked. I think that's a false shock. This is to cover the problem. A revelation that shocked lawmakers. Companies running the state's foster care system said Tuesday that more than 70 foster children are missing in Kansas. Toto? Lawmakers were furious. This all has to be feigned, folks. This is not unknown. In fact, in the documentary, I had 2 senators in the state that I was interviewing that said that they made laws that this is federal, actually, impositions. They made laws that got the money in from the feds to create the foster care child system, that when they got it, they didn't understand the beast they were creating, that when they invoked the law, they adopted the law to bring that into their system, they had no control over this thing, and they themselves were afraid of it for their sons, grandsons, and granddaughters, was what each senator told me. This is how this system actually is working. So lawmakers being furious is really, they're covering something here. They might actually be involved. But they're furious that Phyllis Gilmore, Secretary of the Kansas Department of Children and Families, appeared unaware that 3 sisters had been missing from the Northeast Kansas foster home since August 26th. Now, I've talked about this. Some of these foster care, they give you the shiny face on the news. There's a real dirty thing going on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of kids that don't. That's why I told you early on, folks, if you have anybody going to foster care, the mother or the father or both have to get all over that and show you're not going away. You want to know, you want every meeting with your son or daughter. You want every meeting. Why? Because you don't want them to get lost in the system. You don't want them to get pushed back and forgotten. Well, while you're in their face and they're giving you all the hell they're going to give you, notwithstanding what the Pope just abolished, you need to be in their face as much, demanding that you see your son or daughter. This is critical to this problem. So I don't even really want to talk more. I'm flabbergasted. This is all feigned. If it's not feigned, this is your system not looking at its own information. When they went to look at the information they had, they started seeing all these truths. But this is a cover in my mind, the way I see how this works. They actually tell you here, folks, of these so-called children. But the facts that the person in charge of the wards of the state, that's your children, that's the name children, wards of the state, has no idea these kids, little goats, are missing from her custody is just astounding to me. Her custody is a parent. You're a custodial agent of the ward of the state. She says it right there, and she's flabbergasted and astonished that this is going on. This is a corruption right in your face, folks. This is how this works. This is no joke. The lawmakers are flabbergasted that 70 kids are missing. I didn't hear anywhere in here they're going to search them out either. And we now see lots of other nasty problems in the world about this problem. It's systemic, folks. And as long as everyone stays crickets, these kinds of things continue, and they come out and they say how flabbergasted that they exist. And I'm suggesting to you, when you get involved, you realize, oh no, that was all planned. That was all a setup. That does exactly what it's been doing, and they just got caught. Someone finally looked into it with the right eyes to see, looking at the right information. They asked for the right information, and they blew through and blew down the obstruction that these agents are doing in order to keep that as a cover. And you also did that walking into that, knowing your rights before you got in there. You didn't make it a question to yourself. You didn't make anything a question. You're bringing a matter of law fact into the matter without question. And until we start seeing that more clearly, we're not going to figure out how they're really doing it to us. We walk in and we talk to the minutia instead of talking to the substance of the lack of their authority. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope someone, like I said, inspires you, informs you, gets you directed, goes to have a second look at something. Grimner, thank you for what you do at RealLibertyMedia.com, the blogcaster, and keeping that thing going. And over there at FN Network and .com, and then we have over at Jules. Thank you very much for the syndication and the recast on Thursday. UCY.com and the Terrestrial Broadcasters. Appreciate what y'all do. Folks, I'm at Minds, I'm at BitChute. Jump in. Vince does the YouTubes. He's got that picture there. Got quite a bit of views. Thank you very much for everybody tuning in, and try to help out or sending the message. I'll be here next week, tech diffs or nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, I just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.